Hi, and welcome to season 2 of Frank Talks. I'm Karline Moeller, and I'm the founder of Art Frankly. If you don't already know my co-host, please meet Ellie Hayworth, who is the founder of Hayworth, an art consultancy committed to promoting intrepid ideas at the intersection of art and design. Today, we are chatting with Candace Worth. Candace established Worth Art Advisory in 2001 to bridge the gap between new art collectors and the art world's establishment. Candace has extensive knowledge about the arts and experience in the industry, and we are excited to get chatting with her today. Ellie, I'll let you start the interview now.
Thank you, Karlina. And Candace, thank you so much for contributing your time today.
You're so welcome. Happy to be here.
So Candace, I think this is a great conversation to be kicking off season 2 with, because you have been in the art world through a lot of the different evolutions that we've seen over the past few years. I believe you founded your advisory 20 years ago. Maybe you could take us back to the beginning. What compelled you to start your career in art?
Well, I was very interested in art in college. And when I graduated, I had anticipated going to graduate school. And in those days, and it might be different now, you needed to learn German in order to specialize in anything 20 related. So I had a very strange gig lined up in, I think it was Hanover. And I was going to learn German so that I could come back and go to graduate school. And in the meantime, I think it was that first summer, I met a woman who was the head of Christie's contemporary department at the time. And she said to me, "What, are you insane? You're not going to go live in Hanover." She said, "Come work for me." As a low turn, unpaid, of course, and whatever. But anyway, so that was sort of the very beginning. So it was a little bit circumstantial in a way to come into the art world. But the interest in art was always there. But I never saw it as sort of a mega profession. But the academic route, it was easy to be turned away from the academic route.
Now that makes perfect sense. And now you are, an esteemed member of the APAA. You've really established yourself as a name in, the art advisory game. I'm curious, can you tell us maybe a little bit about the segue from the auction house world into founding an independent advisory?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few steps in between. I was at Christie's for 4 or 5 years. And at the time, it was a conservative environment, much more so than today. And the woman who at the time was running that department had left. And I really felt like I had no kind of direct relationship to artists in any way. It was very driven, very much about numbers and estimates and valuations. And so I wanted to leave to work for a contemporary art gallery. So I left and worked for a very big name in Chelsea, briefly for a couple of years. And then I had 1 or 2 other stops along the way that are not the most exciting things to talk about. And when I was about 30, I said, you know what, people are asking me to sort of find them, younger artists. And I seem to have a lot of friends who are making art, and I seem to have a lot of friends who are starting to make some money. I was not one of those people. But the people who started to make money asked me, they were like, "You have all these like cool, interesting friends who are making work, let's go visit them. Let's start to buy some things for my apartment." And I started to do it. And I loved being that middleman. And I didn't know how to get paid at the time. So artists would often give me something in return for me bringing someone to the studio who ended up acquiring things. So it was really a very innocent way to begin advising. And after doing that for a little while, I just basically decided I can get paid for this. Like, this might be actually a job. And you have to remember, at the time, there was no APAA. I mean, Thea existed and a couple of other very big, Barbara Schwartz. I mean, this was like, the old days. So there were a few art advisors, but they were really seasoned,
Sure.
It was a very different landscape. So I really kind of started very innocently and sort of, I'm kind of, I developed my business in ways that made sense at the time. I didn't really mentor with anyone else. I just sort of went with my gut and my instinct, and it sort of grew from there.
I love that. And I mean, I think one of the things you've alluded to is obviously relationships being kind of a critical part of both the career development component as well as your personal kind of art connoisseurial component. a lot of the things that we try to do with these Frank Talks is offer different kind of professional insights and whatnot to our viewers. What are some of the most valuable networking opportunities or ways that you've built relationships with, whether it's the artists or, as you mentioned, some of your early clients? Like, what would you say are some best practices that have emerged from your experiences?
So purely from a networking standpoint, I mean, I would say, I've always been based in New York, and
Sure.
New York, the landscape again has changed a little bit, but for most of the first sort of half, 2/3 of my career, New York was kind of everything. So a lot of the people that you needed to meet were here. And if you were out and about at the galleries and you were out and about talking to dealers, and you don't have to go to every single dinner or every single opening, but you still have junior associates at places like the Guggenheim and the Met and
Sure.
and between that and the gallery system, and sort of using your friends who are also interested in art. I mean, it's amazing the doors that open. I do think that a lot of young people today coming into this business don't have the patience. I mean, I really
Sure.
spent a lot of years developing a lot of relationships, and I see a lot of people in their 20s today come out and think that there's no reason they shouldn't be invited to X dinner or whatever, but not to totally personalize it. But, it took me 10 years of doing business to get invited to Marion Goodman's dinners. It took me maybe 12 years to get invited to David Zwirner's dinners. I mean, this was not like, you just come out of the gate. So developing all of those relationships took a lot of patience, a lot of time, a lot of trial and error in terms of what I was acquiring for clients. It was a slower path.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I do have to say, as someone who, is continuing to pave a career in the arts herself at the moment, these young patron groups and different kind of affiliate groups with the museums, they do help you very much keep your thumb on the pulse. And if you're wise, as you kind of matriculate through the ranks, you start, rubbing elbows with the right trustees and really becoming curious about how people have either carved a career in the arts or have become great patrons and benefactors. So I could certainly see where it is a bit of a patience game, but it is about organic relationships too.
It's really I mean, at those places, you have access to the curators who are filled with so much knowledge. So interesting to see what they're looking at. I personally never did that, but I know a lot of people that, still today sustain relationships with people they met at MoMA Junior Associates in 2005. And they went to Berlin with Klaus when he founded, KW. I mean, it was really the early days. They didn't go with Klaus, but he was there. I mean, they did incredible trips. I mean, there was so many doors open to them. So I'd say less about the trustees and more about sort of just navigating sort of the interesting things going on in the art world, since you have young, hungry curators there, and you have access to them, which is wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Perhaps on the flip side of the coin, speaking more about the collectorship and your clients, what are some of the kind of key either insights or best practices that you offer an early collector or an early kind of burgeoning collector? You mentioned, education being kind of at the crux of your practice. Tell me a little bit more about, how you start getting people comfortable with art.
It's really tricky, and it's changed over the years, but I would say, first and foremost, you have to have clients who are prepared to put in some time. They have to be able to spend some time in front of gallerists. They have to be able to learn a little bit of that lingo. It is another language. Some clients don't get there. I mean, I've worked with some clients 2 or 3 times, and I just realized that they really have no comfort level with contemporary art. They're just not. They don't get it. They don't understand why it's sort of its own entity, its own language. And then you have other clients who really, I mean, I have some clients who we look at an artist and they go and read 4 books and they come back to me with questions. They're more well read about an artist than I am. So it's really, you figure out pretty quickly what kind of level of intellectual curiosity and commitment the client is going to make. And that, that sort of becomes the sort of a directional, if you will, for how you're going to work with them. If you're just going to make specific recommendations and know that they're not going to hit the pavement and it's up to you to sort of lead them there, without them seeing the work or without them visiting the gallery or without them doing a deep dive, that's okay too, because it's your job to make sure that they don't make huge mistakes. So I'm much more comfortable with that now. At the beginning of my career, I was less comfortable with that. It's a lot of responsibility. You don't want to be wrong. You gain a little more confidence as you start to buy, across the board. So yeah, I think that's about, it's tricky, the educational part, because really you just don't know where people will go with it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I do think, there is a kind of a wonderful side of this industry where, individuals do want to live with beautiful work, but may not be willing to put the kind of the scholarly effort into actually understanding the value behind the pieces or the ascendancy of said artists. So, that's great too. But on the flip side, I think, if you really want to build a strong collection, you certainly have to have that connoisseurial sensibility as well. So it's great to hear that you are kind of an advocate for that aspect.
Yeah. And look, you essentially take on a lot of that responsibility yourself if the client is not willing to do it. So, and that's okay too. You do have a market now where you're dealing with a lot of people who are really buyers and not collectors. And I don't mean furtive way, it just is what it is. And I think that's okay. And in a way, maybe that is more of a case for hiring an advisor, because you hire, you're paid for your knowledge, you're paid for what you know how to do best. And, these people are running businesses and raising families. And, it's a pretty big commitment to cover the contemporary art world. So sometimes
certainly
I have a job,
Understood. And it certainly is evolving every day with all of the new technology and new media. So I imagine there's a lot to keep your thumb on the pulse of.
Yes, that's why young people working for you.
That makes sense. Well, Art Frankly viewers should all keep that in mind.
It's a great time to learn from people who have been doing what I've been doing for, over 20 years, because there are so many things in this new landscape that are not my first nature. And that I would prefer to have, someone who sort of feels so much more comfortable with social media. I have an Instagram account and I'm comfortable posting, but I'm sure there are 100 things I could be doing that I don't do. It's just not my first nature. And for that generation, it is.
Well, I think, Candace, maybe that's a great segue. What are some of the best practices? I imagine you have a team, is that correct?
I have a very small team. I have a full-time registrar. And at different points in my career, I've had a sales director to help me really cover the parts of the market that I felt like I was not doing a great job at covering, because I was busy with the bigger parts of the market or the higher end of the market, the more blue chip parts. And I really just could not be in 2 or 3 places at the same time. So that's really how I've structured my business. And the other side of that as well, while I don't have full-time people doing certain things, I outsource a huge amount of running. I outsource all of my accounting. I outsource obviously any legal issues, and all of my tech and all of those things. And so I have a very well-oiled machine in that sense. Yeah, in that way, I'm able to have a pretty small team and still get done everything we need to get done.
I love that. No, and I respect that very much. I think it's very it's of the time, and it's a smart way to do business. Candace, what would you say is one of kind of the greatest milestones in your career?
Wow.
I'm sorry if that is a hyperbolic question.
Somewhat question, but it's so
Or what is one of the things you're most proud of?
I'm really proud of some of the collections that I've built. I'm really proud of a lot of the support that indirectly I've given to so many young living artists. That really is like, that really is like very special, to be able to know that, there are certain artists that I've bought a ton of work from and put them in wonderful collections, and to go back and still look at that work and still think it's interesting, and beautiful, is really very gratifying. Seeing a lot of the value stay in things that I bought, works that I bought for people 10 and 12 years ago, having clients say, I love seeing my, all the values in my insurance appraisal go up every year, even though they don't all, but a lot of them do, it's very gratifying, to gain the confidence that comes with sort of so many years of looking and dealing with people and dealing with galleries and being really confident in the advice that you give people. that's been pretty gratifying. I wouldn't say there's one specific milestone, in terms of a piece that I bought or loaned to a museum or, placed with a certain kind of a client. I would say it's more that sort of long-term advice that I look back on and feel like I've done a really good job. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do.
That's confidence building.
It is. No, and I have to say, I relate to that. I'm a burgeoning collector, so I certainly don't purport to have, the most astounding collection, but I'm really proud of the pieces that I've acquired. And I've acquired a lot of them very early in the stage of the artist's careers. And there is something exceptionally exciting about seeing kind of their careers as they continue to grow and blossom in, new and more public ways. So I could certainly see where that's something that over the years you could be really proud of. It's great. Candace, we love to wrap up these interviews. Season 1 was always, we're still in the throes of what was the COVID-19 pandemic, but we were really in the heart of it when we were having these conversations a few months ago. But we're starting to see the art world rebound and open up, somewhat cautiously. What are you most excited about in the next year or so now that we're returning to a semblance of normalcy?
I mean, traveling again.
Yeah.
I mean, I know a lot of people are traveling to various fairs, but there's still a lot of caution, especially on Americans' shoulders. I mean, we are definitely more nervous. I mean, the number of Americans who went to Basel a few weeks ago was quite small. I think we're still all a little bit nervous. We're not totally out of the woods. I mean, I really look forward to being able to go to London and Paris and go to those galleries and see those shows and connect with, colleagues that you over the years, sometimes I've seen 4 and 5 and 6 times a year. It's like, it isn't family to some degree. We email and we talk on the phone, but it's very different than sitting down to dinner after, a big day at a fair, and really swapping stories and getting to know what's going on. So that to me has really been the big missing link. I mean, business is really still going for business is happening. The market has been surprisingly strong and resilient. But I think it's those connections that for me have been really lacking. So I really can't wait to get sort of back to that.
I mean, I certainly can agree with that. And I do think that's actually quite a bright note to end on, because at the end of the day, I think we're all in it because of the creators and the people who are keeping this market alive. So Candace, I think this has really been just a wonderful nugget of wisdom. I am very excited to have gotten to know you, and thank you again for contributing to the inaugural Frank Talk.
Thank you so much.